for them. So, okay, that's it. Glad I was able to point that out. Just doing my job. Hey, if you open up your Bibles to the book of Genesis today, that would be a good thing. We are fast closing in on the end of the book of Genesis. Okay, we're getting to the place that we are on the downhill slope, if you will. Might as well talk in Winter Olympic terms. So, could I get your clicker, Joel? This one seems dead. So, anyway, it's because I'd rather not have to walk back here and press the button all the time. Anyway, last week, and just to set the stage, last week we saw Judah step up in an amazing way with his brothers. Joseph is putting them through a test, and he is saying, he's making them jump through hoops. He's setting up false accusation. He wants to see how they're going to respond. Are they going to throw Benjamin under the bus? And Judah steps up and in an impassioned plea to Joseph says, "Send Benjamin back to my father. Let me serve as your slave." Now that is such a huge adjustment to the way Joseph remembered the brothers. He could hold back no longer. Judah's words demonstrated to him Judah was willing to sacrifice the rest of his life to never see his family again in order that Benjamin would be able to go back to Canaan and see his father. And that's where we're picking up today. Now, I've entitled today's message, God's Plan Unfolds. At the end of last week, I spoke about the fact that, this was all God's plan, not the intricate details. God's plan was that Jacob's people, would get to Egypt. And now, and they chose a route that was pretty painful for everyone involved. God could have chosen a lot easier route for them because did the same thing. But way back in Genesis 15, it says, Yahweh said to Abram, "Know with certainty that your seed will be resident aliens in a land that is not theirs, and will serve its inhabitants, and they will oppress them for 400 years. Then I will also judge the nation which they serve, and later they will leave with great amounts of personal property." So the Lord is speaking to Abraham way in advance of this, saying, your descendants are going to end up in a land that is not Canaan, and they're going to be there for a long time, but it's part of my plan. So they all knew this because, of course, Abraham was going to be sharing it with his descendants. And so now we're watching God's plan unfold. And we get to the place where Judah makes this impassioned plea and this unimaginable self-sacrificial statement to Joseph, and Joseph is undone by it. And that's where we pick up today. Chapter 45, verses 1 and 2. Joseph was not able to keep himself under control in the presence of all those who were standing near him, so he called out urgently, "Send everyone away from me." So no one stood with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He raised his voice weeping, and the Egyptians heard, and the household of Pharaoh heard. So, Joseph is way overcome, unable to hold his emotions back. He's already wept twice. One time he just turned around and got composure. The other time he had to go to his private room and he wept, but quietly, and then was able to gain his composure again and come back in and speak to his brothers. But now it was over. What Judah had just done was too much for him because it demonstrated such a changed heart among his brothers. And he recognized that God was showing him that now was the time to reveal himself, and he couldn't handle it any longer. So he cleared the room of the Egyptian witnesses. He just simply got everyone out of there because the things he was going to talk about with his brothers was not something he necessarily wanted everyone in Egypt to know about. He was a beloved figure. And if the beloved figure of all Egypt was suddenly found out to have been betrayed in a brutal way by his brothers, you understand there wouldn't have been a lot of favor for his brothers. And so he sends all the Egyptians away. They could hear stuff going on, but they couldn't hear the intimate details of how it had all happened. And so he cleared the room of the witnesses, and then he made himself know. He raised his voice weeping. And the Egyptians heard, which means the Egyptians who cleared the room. They could be in different parts of the house. Remember that we know what the houses of the high officials looked like in Egypt during that time because of archaeological stuff and, pictures and all that. And so it would have a large room in it, like a dining area, because that's where affairs of state would be held. And then the family was in large portions aside. And so all the Egyptians who were cleared out had plenty of places to go besides that formal meeting room. However, it wasn't just the people who were in Joseph's house that heard. It was the people in Pharaoh's house, which means Pharaoh's house was probably like right across the courtyard, which makes sense. Joseph and Pharaoh needed to be in close contact with each other all the time, but however they were located, they were close enough that Pharaoh's household heard the noise. Tells you how loud Joseph got, and his brothers, okay? That everyone's going, what's going on? What calamity has just happened? What is happening? And so they're wondering. Of course, they'll start to wonder what's going on. So this is loud, okay? Now, as the brothers, can you imagine them? What is happening? What is happening? Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were filled with panic at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please draw near to me." So they drew closer. He said to them, "I am your brother Joseph. I am here because you sold me into Egypt." That last point wasn't one they wanted to be reminded of right now. So we've got the initial revelation presented. He says, "I'm Joseph." And the brothers are going, "What did he just say?" Okay, now understand what has happened. His interpreter is no longer in the room. He's been speaking through an interpreter. They don't even know that he understands their language. And all of a sudden, he starts speaking their language, and that had to be like they were hammered by, just a blow, because that means he understood everything that they've been saying. And then the words that come out of his mouth is, "I am Joseph." That's just two Hebrew words, okay? And he's just going, Joseph, of course, but he's just saying, bang, "I'm Joseph." And they're going, this is pretty interesting. "Is my father still alive?" And you say, well, they've said many times he's alive. And what he's saying is, are you lying to me about Dad? Because they could have been, as a part of their official, we can't tell him the dad died or we won't have sympathy with him. So he now wants to know, is he really alive? And their reaction is priceless. They were filled with panic at his presence. They couldn't even respond because they realize, here's the guy we sold. And we didn't listen to him, and we were ruthless. They have admitted in front of Joseph that they were ruthless. They had guilty consciences, and now the man is standing in front of them, and he's the one who is ruling all of Egypt. This is a very interesting position for them to be in. So he says, "Come closer, you need to see me." Okay, because they needed to see him through all of his Egyptian trappings. And you understand, they shaved hair and they did all sorts of things and used, some types of makeup and stuff like that. But they drew closer, and he said to them, "I'm your brother Joseph." And then he makes that statement that would have, Benjamin, of course, would have heard him say, "Whom you sold into Egypt." Now here's Benjamin. There's 10 brothers who know that's exactly what happened. And so now Benjamin hears, "Yeah, what did you just say?" Okay? And now I want you to have that lens for a minute of Benjamin going, what did you just say? And, obviously the shocked look by the brothers and the look on them, Benjamin wouldn't have any doubt that this is exactly what happened, especially now that Joseph turns out alive. And because Benjamin was well aware of the blood-soaked cloak and all of the stuff that they used to be able to do their charade in order to deceive Jacob. Now, you can understand, Benjamin at this point in time has got some things clicking inside of his head, okay, about his brothers. Now, do not be worried, and let not anger burn in your eyes because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life, because this famine has been in the land 2 years, but there are still 5 years in which there will be no plowing of land or harvesting of crops. God sent me before you to ensure for you a remnant on the earth and to keep many survivors alive for you. So Joseph goes from saying who he was to how now they're supposed to respond. Because humanly speaking, their response should be to get on their knees and to start begging for forgiveness. Please don't kill us, okay? Because they had sold him. I mean, you understand, they thought he was dead because he was sold into Egypt. He could have been put anywhere, and it was only because God gave him, he had a plan for him that he ended up in Potiphar's house, which was a good posting, by the way. Even though he was a slave, he was still not out working the fields. He wasn't doing jobs that took the lives of slaves left and right because of disease and overwork or all of those things. He was someone, he was in a great position. And even when he was put in prison, he was in a great position in the prison. If you're going to be in a prison, you should be in charge of it. Okay? So, but no one wants to be in a prison, and he didn't. But he was in charge of it. So anyway, he says, hey, don't be worried, because there were 10 guys there that were worried about how Joseph was going to respond. And then Joseph said, let not anger burn in your eyes. There was one guy there who would have been on fire right now. And his name was Benjamin. Joseph is covering both groups. This group of 10 is going to be very worried about what I'm going to do next. This one is going to be ready to hit his brother with a baseball bat if they'd invented them yet, because of the fact that they lied to him all of his life. And so, yeah, the anger of Benjamin, you bet. He said, don't let anger burn in your eyes, because Benjamin would have been livid at the lie. So would have you. When you find out someone's lied to you your entire life, you think to yourself, well, that wasn't very pleasant. And you wonder about any truthfulness at that point in time. Anger can be a major part of it, especially when you believe what's been being said. He said, the reason I'm here is God sent me before you to preserve life. The famine's going to go on, and you're going to have a problem if you stay up there. And so God sent me before you to ensure for you a remnant, okay, that you'll have survivors alive. And so that's really why he understands. He's like, I understand why God sent me here. You guys didn't have all of this in mind, but the reason God allowed this is because of what needed to happen, so we could take care of a problem confronting Dad's line that was coming up. This had to be a pretty incredible scene. This is one that we need to rehearse together as we are before the Lord. In the new heaven and the new earth, when we're watching all the videos of what, scenes in history. And remember, we'll be able to understand every language then. So we'll be able to hear the interchange and the way, the nuances and stuff. This is high drama. Oh, it's really cool. Anyway, so in these circumstances, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has appointed me as father to Pharaoh, the Lord of all his household, and the one who rules over all the land of Egypt. Act quickly and go up to my father. Say to him, your son Joseph says this, God has appointed me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not stay where you are. You will live in the land of Goshen, and you will be near me, you and your sons, the sons of your sons, your flocks and your cattle, and all of which is yours. I will support you there so that your house, you, your household, and all who are with you are not reduced to destitution, for there are still 5 years of famine to come. That means Joseph already knew his plan was to have everyone pay. We'll find that out later about Joseph, how he took care of Egypt, and you can imagine that he drove even harder bargains for the nations that had to come to him, and understood that they were going to be destitute too, because they were going to be paying everything. By the way, in a free market economy, the guy with the goods is the one who sets the price. That's the way it should be. And Egypt was blessed by God to know in advance for a purpose. And now Egypt would be the one who would, because they listened to God. You understand? God rewards those who listen. And because Pharaoh was, as far as we know, he never gave up his paganism. And so Pharaoh was someone who was blessed because he raised Joseph up and he believed the dream that had been sent to him. And God responded by blessing Egypt in an amazing way. So anyway, Joseph is speaking to them and he's saying, hey, as you look at the circumstances and what's going on right now, you can see that God's the one who engineered this whole thing. And he's trying to take a little bit of the weight off of the shoulders of the brothers. But at the same time, the brothers did this abominable thing. I mean, there's just no way to sugarcoat that. And so now here's what's going to happen. You're going to live in the land. God gave me this position. You're going to live in the land because of the fact that I need to preserve you. And so he gives them, he says, you go home now and you tell my father I'm alive. Okay, now think about that. I want you to think about that. Now you go home and you tell my father I'm alive. Ya liars. You've told him all these years I'm dead. Now you tell him I'm alive. Can you imagine the brothers? Who's going to tell Dad this? This is a this is a difficult conversation that was coming. You know, when Jesus said, what you whisper in the secret is going to be shouted from the rooftops, they did this thing with Joseph in secret. All of history knows about it because God put it in the Bible. That's talking about shouting from the rooftops. So their evil was not going to be hidden any longer. And of course, their conscience clearly were bothering them along the way. But he says, hey, listen, there's going to be 5 more years of this famine. If you don't come down right now, you're not going to have survivors. You need to come down because you need to come for the provision, and we'll make sure that you're taken care of. So look, your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin can see that my mouth is the one speaking to you. You must explain to my father about all my glory in Egypt and all that you have seen. You must also move quickly and bring my father here. Then he fell on the neck of his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept on them. After this, his brothers spoke with him. Now, this is a big reconciliation scene that we've got going on right in front of us. First thing he says is, the interpreter's gone. He has been speaking through an interpreter. And so now he makes that opening phrase, look, you can tell this is my mouth that's speaking. He's speaking Hebrew. This is clearly Joseph. And their own eyes were testifying to them that this was the one. This man would not have known who Joseph was. I mean, there's no way he would have known. They would not know this. He would not know the story of being sold. And maybe if Joseph came and he said to someone, "This is what happened to me," but how would the whole story would not work unless it was actually Joseph standing in front of them. But he does say more than that. He says, "Look, my brother Benjamin can look. He knows this is me. He knows. He sees the resemblance." And so, even though Joseph would have changed a lot in those years. In those 22 years, there would have been resemblances, especially to his older brothers, especially to Benjamin, that he could see some of the things there. The brothers could certainly see it. And so now you go and you tell Father what's going on. And you notice he says, tell Dad that his son has made out good. You understand? Okay? I mean, that's cool. He says, tell him about my glory. Everything that you have seen. At that point in time, that's a son saying, you tell my father I have held up the family name. I mean, that's just an amazing statement. He wants Jacob, because all of a sudden you've got all this thing. God's doing this, God's doing that, God's doing that. And there's this sudden statement of, but by the way, tell him what's going on with me. Make sure he understands that I've got tremendous honor and glory in this country. And tell them what you've recognized and what you've seen. Now, by the way, that wasn't going to be too hard, because when they came back to the guy that's the ruler of all of Egypt, and he said all these things, that's, by the way, Joseph. And so they understood, that yeah, I will tell him about this. And then he goes and he gives Benjamin a big hug and falls weeping on his neck. Benjamin weeps on his neck. What's going to happen next? He kisses all of his brothers. They had that kiss on the cheek thing or on the side, whatever. And he wept on them too. Okay? That probably is the most sincere thing he could have done. I mean, it probably was pretty easy, because all he had to do was picture in his mind what they had done to him. But now he was pleased with the reconciliation. And he moved beyond the words, and he went and he hugged each and every one of them. And there was this relational healing going on. It says, after this, his brothers spoke with him. That's a little throwaway phrase, isn't it? Until you remember this verse. Genesis 37:4. His brothers saw that their father loved him above all his brothers, and they hated him. They were not able to speak civilly to him. They couldn't talk to him. And now they're having a chat with him for the first time since he had reached adulthood, 17. That's relational healing that God was doing. And it was initiated by the one who was offended. And the brothers who have had years and then this whole experience with Joseph to come to grips with the evil that they had done are able to sit down, and you can bet a lot of the discussion was about the wrong that they had done to Joseph. But you also know part of the discussion was, tell me about what has been going on these last 20 years. I want to know what's going on because I've been absent from your lives. Please tell me what has happened among your families and among all of this. Because they were his half-brothers. He would be interested in all of that. And some of the sordid stuff that we've read about and some of the other stuff we've read about would have been stuff that he had no knowledge of. And so now he was being caught up to speed as he went along. It says, now when the uproar was heard in the house of Pharaoh, and some said that the brothers of Joseph had come, it was pleasing in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of his servants. So Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, load your beasts, go, enter the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come to me. I will give you a good area in the land of Egypt, and you will eat the best of the land. Okay, so now Pharaoh gets involved. The sound, as I said before, probably across a courtyard. You know, if you think in Florida terms, it'd be across the swimming pool courtyard. Well, maybe they had a big pool too. You never know, okay? But whatever it was, the sound carried across to Pharaoh's house. So they investigated, of course, what's going on over at Joseph's house, except they called him Ashnath Paneah, or, whatever is, Zaphanath Paneah. But because they called him by his Egyptian name. Interesting in this story that Pharaoh calls him Joseph a couple times, okay, not by his Egyptian name. So the sound carried to Pharaoh's house, and so they responded. Finds out his brothers are here. That's what all the noise is about. And it says not only Pharaoh, but his servants. That'd be his officials, all the officials of the kingdom. That's how much favor Joseph had. There wasn't that political intrigue. The political intrigue that's always there, where someone's saying, I don't want him to succeed because I can succeed if he doesn't succeed. Okay? That's just in organizations. You understand? People may be friends and everything, but there's that selfish ambition which is in the heart of human beings, especially when they don't know the Lord, that says, oh, if he's deposed, now I have an opportunity. If Pharaoh's not happy with him, I have an opportunity. I might be able to get his position. You can bet when the chief cupbearer was in the prison with Joseph for a couple days, the second in command among the cupbearers was saying, ooh, this looks good for me. And that's just the way human nature is. And so, but it says all of his servants. That'd be all the people that would benefit if Joseph was removed. But they were so enamored with him because of what he had done for Egypt, they owed him their lives, really. And the continued prosperity of Egypt, people they were happy for him. Oh, good. Probably, and I'll tell you, part of the reason is Joseph's not going to be interested in going to find his family. I mean, they always had that. They wouldn't have let him go. No. I mean, he wasn't a slave, but when you've got responsibilities that he was given, you just don't have an opportunity to quit. You know, this is your job, and you better step up to your responsibilities. We've given you honor, and now you better live up to that honor. That's the way it works. Sometimes when we look at the president's cabinets, president raises up a cabinet around him. You know what he's just done? Given them major honor and recognition. They're going to be the talk of the households in the government that they are a part of. In the United States, of course, is what I'm referring to. And if they do not live up to what the responsibility that they've been given, if they don't understand the stature that has been granted to him by the man at the top, or her, the man at the top, and they treat it lightly, they're not lasting long. They're going to be invited to leave. Why? They have not responded with the appropriate amount of response to the major bit of honor that they've just been given by the most powerful man in the world. Because the United States has the largest army, largest, whatever, economy, all of that. And so if they don't live up to it, they're going to see themselves walking out the door. There was probably far more consequence. I mean, we do know the chief cupbearer and the chief baker were of that stature. One of them was executed, and one of them was returned to his position. And so when you're in a pagan government like that, the cost can be much higher. You understand, in the United States, when we lose a cabinet member, the person is fired, and then they go and they get on the news. And they write a book. They make tons of money. They do a tell-all. They could be making everything up. It doesn't matter. They're going to make tons and tons of money. You do that in China. When they purge people out of the party, and that's going on right now in China. This is big news. If you're not aware of this means that things are not in China the way that they were just a little while ago. When they purge you, you're dead or in prison. It's not like you're retired to write your tell-all. It's just not done, okay? And that wouldn't have been done here either. But Pharaoh they're all pleased. They're all saying, thank God. He's got his family here. And Pharaoh ratifies Joseph's invitation. Understand, Joseph was second in command, in charge of meeting with everyone that came in from the outside, certainly, because that's why he had to deal with his brothers to begin with. He was in charge of ratifying treaties, making sure that countries that came in and wanted grain, it was all favorable to Egypt. But you can guarantee that Pharaoh was the one that had to okay every one of these treaties. He had to be the one who was ratifying them all. And so Joseph had offered that his brothers would be able to come to the land of Egypt, but he's not the one that ratifies those treaties. Pharaoh is. So Pharaoh was the one who was ratifying the treaty, and honestly going beyond what Joseph had planned, and went way beyond what Joseph had planned. He says, hey, I'm going to give you a good area in the land of Egypt. One of the things he did not say is, I'm giving you the best area of the land of Egypt. Okay, now I know many of your translations will say that, but the Hebrew word is tov. Okay, it means good. You could translate it desirable, but it means good. And what he's saying is, I'm going to give you a good area to settle in and live in. And then you're going to eat the best of the land. I mean, we're going to treat you like royalty once you get here. But guess who had the best area of land? Pharaoh. Yeah, of course. Pharaoh and Joseph. They're the ones who were, they didn't, when they chose the place they were going to live down, the pharaohs down in the history of Egypt, they didn't say, well, let's go live in the swamp. They said, what's the best area to live in? By the way, in the United States, we put all our politicians in the swamp in Washington, D.C. Makes perfect sense. So anyway, Pharaoh says, hey, we're going to give you a good area in the land of Egypt, and you'll eat the best of the land. We're going to honor you in a big way. In addition, you are also ordered, just reminding him that he's Pharaoh, ordered, right? You are also ordered, do this, take for yourselves wagons from the land of Egypt for your children and your wives, then bring your father and come. Do not let your eyes be troubled about your equipment, for a good area in all the land of Egypt is there for you. The sons of Israel prepared in this way, and Joseph gave wagons to them according to Pharaoh's command. He also gave them food for the journey. So Pharaoh is going beyond Joseph. He's commanding now. He's saying, by the way, do this. You don't dare leave here without wagons. And here's the purpose for the wagons. And he's going over and above. This is called rolling out the red carpet. He's making sure that nothing is getting in the way of them coming. Because they could have said, no, this is a big thing to move from one land to another and to give up everything that you have there. So he sends supply wagons, because one of the major things that would prevent them from relocating is their stuff. They've built up stuff. So he sends wagons to be able to bring everything back so the stuff doesn't hold them back. This is thinking ahead. So the supply of wagons go. He says, by the way, don't let it trouble you about anything you can't bring, because there's going to be some stuff that can't fit in the wagons. There's going to be some stuff that is just impractical to transport. And he says, don't let it trouble you. We're going to make sure you're covered. And so Pharaoh doesn't want them to say no. Because it'd be easy to say, no, we can't go. Look at all this we got. And, we can't, the wine press we can't take with us, or whatever. And so he says, no, don't let any of that trouble you. You're going to be in a good area in the land of Egypt. You're going to be fine. And so they were told to get on it. Joseph told them to go quickly, and now Pharaoh told them to go quickly. And so they began their preparations to be able to get going. By the way, why did Joseph want him to go quickly? Jacob's clock is ticking. Remember his question? Is my father really alive? He doesn't want Jacob to go another day without knowing the truth that he's alive, that Joseph is alive. And he also wants to make sure that he gets the maximum amount of time with his father in his old age before he passes away. It turns out he lived a lot of years down there. I think it was 17, but it's just off the top of my head right now, so don't quote me on that. To all of them, to each man, he gave changes of garments. But to Benjamin, he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. But to his father, he sent this: 10 male donkeys carrying the desirable things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys carrying grain, bread, and provisions for his father on the journey. He sent his brothers away, but as they went, he said to them, do not be upset along the road. He knew his brothers. Anyway, so he gives gifts to all the brothers, which is really nice. Gifts to every one of them. And then he gives 300 pieces of silver, which is a huge amount of money, to Benjamin. And then he gives him 5 sets of clothing. Now, you understand, most people had 1 or 2. Okay? Royalty would have more. But now he's got 5 sets of clothing. And he kind of walks in the steps of Jacob, doesn't he? If he could have made Benjamin a coat of many colors on short notice, he probably would have done so. I don't know what he trusted his brothers' hearts were changed. That's all I can say. He wanted to bless his brother. He missed him desperately. But then he sent 10 male donkeys with all of those other things to his father. Basically, if we're talking about donkeys, we say donkeys. They would say male or female donkeys, different words. Well, you could use the generic word donkey if you're talking about a whole herd. But generally speaking, they would differentiate between the female ones and the male. There was different value to them. You didn't need as many male donkeys to mate female donkeys and to make many, many little donkeys. This is basic biology. You should all know this, okay? And so many of us are not close enough to the farm anymore to know exactly. When you're a farmer, and I grew up in Wisconsin and worked on farms, helped on farms. Just do that part of growing up when you live in the country, because when farmers they need to get the neighbors helping them to do certain tasks, and you get involved and you help them. But you understand that the neighbors had a whole lot of milking cows, and then heifers who would become milking cows. But once they were bred. But they only had a couple bulls. In fact, many of them didn't have any bulls. They would just hire the service of a bull. Why? You don't need many bulls. You need a lot of cows. And the cows would give birth. The next time you bring in you bring in another bull, one with different DNA. I mean, you understand. You just keep building your herd that way, bringing in the strengths of the other animal into your herd. But you don't need to keep one around. Bulls are nasty. They're not necessarily one that you want around your kids all the time because they are territorial and they're known for goring people. There's biblical statements about, the fact if your bull is goring people, you got some responsibility there in the law. So, do not be upset along the road. And all I can think about is the brothers are thinking, what are we going to say to Dad? This is like the entire way back. Every step they took, accountability is coming. Not from Joseph, he was gracious, but from Jacob, okay? They have to go and tell the story to their dad that they lied to him. And Benjamin, who by this time, Joseph is basically buying him off. Here's 300, and he wasn't, but you understand. Here, I want you to think about 300 pieces of silver and 5 sets of garments, so you're not thinking about your brothers anymore and how ticked off you are at them. Okay? So, but now as they leave, he gives them this statement, don't be upset on the road. In other words, don't worry, don't get fearful, don't do any of that. God's going to take care of this, basically. But they had to have a very painful conversation. I can imagine that the brothers looked at Judah and said, you did a great job with Joseph. Could you be the one who's, and that of course would. He was certainly stepping forward as the spokesman of the people. So they went up from the land of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob. They reported to him saying, Joseph is still alive. In truth, he is ruler over all the land of Egypt. But his heart was numb, for he did not believe them. However, when they told him all the words of Joseph that he had spoken to them, and when he saw the wagons which Joseph sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father came to life. Then Israel said, I have more than enough. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. So they got there. We're not told about that difficult conversation. We're not told about the follow-up conversations. We're told about none of that. Again, those will be videos that be very entertaining when we're with the Lord. But anyway, so they went there and they said, hey, Joseph is still alive and he's ruling all of Egypt. He's the guy we've been dealing with. And that news was really almost too much of a shock for Jacob. He'd been around. He lived all these years believing Joseph was dead, and now he finds out not only is Joseph not dead, he's thriving. He's reigning over the entire land of Egypt, but his heart was numb. That means he was basically in shock. Okay, he couldn't process it. He may have stared for a while. This is an overwhelming shock that is being described, and he was just not able to process it, and he didn't believe them. He just could not handle it. However, it says when they told him all the words of Joseph, and the main thing, he's looking out at 20 carts filled with provision, and he knows they didn't have enough money to buy all this stuff from Egypt, and they are now getting ready to go take all of those carts back. Now, one of the things that you have to understand, if you've got 10 wagons, that's what it said, right? 10 female, 10 male. How many brothers were there? Oh, 11. Who's driving the other carts? It means there's a whole bunch of Egyptians with them. Now, and to protect them along the way. It means that this is a whole retinue that shows up. And that they're going to be protected. They were protected on the way back with all of this stuff, and they're being protected on the way there. He didn't send them defenseless, and of course he needed more people to drive the wagons because they needed to have those wagons driven. And so it was quite the retinue that showed up. And because of that, he began to believe. So Joseph's words and his gifts, it says, their father came to life. That's an amazing statement. Okay. I mean, some translations say revived. That's perfect. Okay. But came to life is like he had been living in the shadow of death, which is where he was. He said, you're going to bring my gray hair down to Sheol in sorrow. That's all he could focus on, is his coming death. By the way, that's all you focus on as you age. You're going to age faster and you're going to die sooner. You got to live a productive life. God wants you to live long and a productive life and to fight for every breath, because there's productive things to do. And it's precious to him in his eyes whenever one of his saints come to him. But one of the things you don't want to hear is the Lord saying, you know, you could have lasted another 2 years, but your thinking was stinking. Okay, that was a phrase my dad used to use. He would train salespeople all the time. He'd always say, the problem, guys, is your thinking is stinking. It's the way it works. So he revived. He came to life, and he says, hey, everything's fine now. It's peaches and cream. It's good. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go see him before I die. This is a complete change. His brothers, but I got to tell you, I've kind of seen this happen recently. Because Rick Joyner was convinced that he wasn't long for this earth. He would get up in front of the entire congregation and he would say, I am not going to be here long. I'll be transitioning, and so I'm doing what is necessary to make sure everything gets done. And the rest of us would be sitting out there go, oh, okay. But, you know, he felt he was hearing from the Lord. And then the Lord came to him and says, I have plans for you. And you're going to be around for a long time. Okay, the difference in Rick right now to the Rick that thought he was leaving soon is amazing. And he was good then. But now it's like he's the Energizer Bunny on steroids. I was sitting with him. It was about 10 o'clock at night and a couple other guys on Friday night. And I was actually surprised Rick had come over to the place where we meet. And because I knew it was a long day. And while I'm talking to him, and now it's about 10 at night, and I'm talking to him, and one of the guys brought up the fact that Rick said he had been awake since 3:30 in the morning. It's 10 o'clock at night. And I looked at him and I said, Rick, if I had been up since 3:30 in the morning, I wouldn't be here. And that's an honest statement. I would have been crashing already and going back and going to sleep. And he said, you know, I learned long ago from the strongest man in the world. I mentioned him earlier. Charles Atlas. He heard that guy teach once. And Charles Atlas, he said this. He said, every hour that you sleep before midnight counts as 2 hours. So he said, because it's before midnight. And so he said, in my mind, he said, and it's proved itself out in my life, if I go to bed at midnight, I need 8 hours. If I go to bed at 10, I only need 6. Because the 2 before midnight count as 4. And he said, so if I go to bed late and I get 6 hours of sleep, I'll need a nap in the afternoon. But if I go to bed at 10 and get 6 hours of sleep, he said, I don't need a nap in the afternoon. I'm just giving you Rick's wisdom right now. Anyway, that's how revitalized he is. He had been up since 3:30, apparently getting 6 hours of sleep, and he's sitting with us at 10 p.m. at night. And the change is incredible. The energy and the life, he's just taken on more significant role in the ministry. And I'm watching this. I've seen this happen in probably a much smaller scale than what happened to Jacob, but it changed his life. Pretty amazing. Okay, real quick. And this is the first part of the next chapter. It's significant, so I wanted to get it in today. Israel set out on the journey with all that he owned. He came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. He responded, here I am. He said, I am the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will establish you as a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I myself will also certainly lead you out. Joseph will lay his hand on your eyes. Okay, this is a pretty impressive time. Okay, so Israel sets out, stops in Beersheba. Beersheba is where the patriarchs had lived for a lot of years, Abraham and Isaac, and had sacrificed there. And so he did exactly the same thing. He offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. He knew that that's where Isaac had offered sacrifice. And so God speaks to him in visions of the night, calls out. Jacob responds, and God says, don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. Okay? Why might Jacob be afraid about going down to Egypt? Well, because God had said to Isaac, when Isaac was headed toward that direction, Yahweh appeared to Isaac and said, you must not go down to Egypt. Live in the land about which I will speak to you. And so everyone knew that story. We're not supposed to go to Egypt. They knew Abraham had said they were going to be in a different land, but Isaac was told, don't go to Egypt. And so now God had to show up and say, it's okay to go down to Egypt. So, very interesting to me. Then it says, he says, Jacob or Joseph will lay his hand on your eyes. What that means is, if you're going to translate, it's kind of an idiom, but it means he'll close your eyes when you die. He'll be performing the rituals that need to be done when you pass from this life. It's like super tender. It's like the Lord saying, go down there and enjoy your son. And he'll be with you to the very end of your life right now. Okay, I have one question before we go on. God's having this nice chat with Jacob. But over 22 years, he never told Jacob that Joseph was alive. Just let that sit there for a minute. He had the ability to communicate to Jacob, and he didn't tell him. As Jacob wallowed in grief that Joseph was alive. Teaches you about God, doesn't it? He let him labor in a false belief. Let me think. If I remember correctly, he sent angels to have dinner with Abraham. And a theophany. And they showed up in person. I can understand that when we start wallowing in self-grief, that self-pity thing, it's hard for God to get a message through to us in dreams and visions. It just is. It's never good to wallow in self-pity and all that junk. But, with Abraham, he sent literal angels to have a chat with him about something that was a big message. Yay! Isaac is coming. Your son is going to be born. And it would seem to me that this is a fairly big message about the fact that, hey, you've been lied to by your sons. Learn the ways of God. Learn the ways of God. Jacob had to learn trust. Didn't do it real well, but he did it well enough that God watched over him. I'm not sure any of us would have done any better with the massive blow he took when Joseph died and then when Rachel died. But learn the ways of God. Sometimes he waits for just the right time to tell us something. And then when he tells us or when he shows us or when he does it, it washes away. It's like childbirth. And Jesus made that reference. A woman forgets the pain of childbirth over the joy that a human being has been born into the world. And then, holding on to that little baby. My sister used to say, when she had babies, she'd say, every time I had a baby, I'd say never again. And then about 2 years later, she'd be holding someone else's baby and going, well. I always laughed when I heard that story, because it was like, it's just what Jesus said. It was like, hey, the joy of having your own child and realizing, I really miss holding that really little old baby in my hand. So, but that's the ways of God. And pay attention to that, because sometimes we say, why isn't God speaking to me on this topic? And God has a great deliverance planned. And the deliverance, we wouldn't have believed it anyway. I'm telling you, there are times the Lord speaks to us and said, I tell you, but you wouldn't believe it anyway. Okay? And so he's in grace not telling us. Because when you don't believe God, well, think about what happened when, Zechariah didn't believe the angel, like Gabriel, he couldn't speak for 9 months, or hear, I think. He was just deaf and dumb. Yeah, he was just like totally he was taken out because of the fact that he didn't have belief. When God's speaking to you, or if he's speaking to you through one of his messengers, you got an accountability. And if we're not going to believe it, it's a mercy if he doesn't tell us. He just shows us. So that's a good way to end Jacob's story. Pretty powerful way to end Jacob's, dealing with this thing about Joseph. Next week we get to be able to see the reunion and a whole lot of stuff that God is doing. So anyway, thank you, Lord, for the opportunity to once again see you moving in the life of Joseph and Jacob and the brothers. I thank you for this wonderful exposition in your word of how you work and how you moved in this very difficult situation. And I ask that the truths which we've uncovered today would actually touch our lives in new ways. In your name, Jesus, amen.